Hello there and welcome. The idea behind today's video is to give you some ideas for how to illustrate and embellish lettering. I'm going to show you 3 different designs on a letter A, letter R and letter T. However, you can use the ideas I'm showing you and apply them to any letter of the alphabet, or any number actually. The approach is exactly the same. Just some things to mention before we get started. The video has been sped up in certain places, which may be obvious, but just in case it's not, I don't actually paint that quickly and wouldn't expect anyone else to, so no pressure. And secondly, please feel free to pause or rewind the video at any time. All the materials are listed in the description box below, along with the height and width of each of the letters. Okay, so as you'll see I've done here, the first step is to draw the outline of your letter. I'm starting with the letter A and fill it in with a block of colour. In this case I'm using the colour Burnt Umber, which is a shade of brown which I feel works well with the organic style of the illustrations. But you could go for a different colour if you like. I think a green would also look nice. Try to keep all the edges crisp, as this will elevate the overall look. As I paint, I make sure the paint on the paper stays wet until the whole letter is filled in. This way you can achieve a uniform covering of paint without any streaky bits. Also make sure to keep the brush very wet and full of paint as you go. Let the block of colour dry, and then at different points around the letter A, with a generous amount of flame red paint, paint in 4 circles with wavy, uneven edges. Each one should touch the edge of the letter A, and ideally at least one of the circles should look like it's peeking out from behind the letter. These will become poppies. Make sure that the poppy heads are arranged in such a way that they're sitting at different heights, like you would find in a meadow. Following this will be the addition of some lavender. Mix blue with the red you put onto the tray for the poppies and mix the 2 together until you get a purple. We're going to have 3 pieces of lavender in this illustration scattered around the letter. One on the left, which sits diagonally in the direction of the top left-hand corner. One in the middle, slightly to the left of the centre of the letter A, which sits vertically, and a horizontal one on the right, lower than the one on the left, which points in the direction of the top right corner. Hold your brush so that when you gently dab paint onto the paper, your brush can be pressed down from a horizontal angle to create lines of delicate ovals, like the shape of lavender buds. In addition, I also like to add in some small round dots in amongst the vertical ovals for some variation. So go in and add a couple of those to all your lavender flowers. Then go back to the paint and mix up some blue and red again, but this time with a much larger amount of red in order to create a magenta purple, and add in a few more buds in amongst the ones already on the paper. Once that's done, we're going to add in 3 small yellow flowers. So after rinsing out your brush, take some yellow and paint in asterisk characters like you would find on a computer keyboard to create the impression of petals. Now I would also suggest making the petals a little more rounded without being too precious about keeping things even, as the uneven approach makes the shapes look more organic. Once all 3 are in place, add in a few small lines in between the petals. Okay, now for some suggestions for how you could use the embellished letters. You could use them on an invitation, on a handmade card, or in a creative journal, or turn it into a sign or piece of art to put on the wall using a word like hope or love or joy. Perhaps it could be turned into a gift with the recipient's initials, or turn it into a memento with the initials of the names of you and your partner, or you and a friend. There's also the option of creating these illustrations in felt tip pen or in colouring pencils, which will work well on a paper that's thinner, and it should also be quicker as well, which I think makes for a nice alternative. Right, after the yellow flowers, it's time to add in some stems. So put a plentiful amount of Sap Green onto your tray, and using a thin detail brush, paint thin lines which gently curve in different directions from the bottom of each of the flowers to the edges of the letter A. Then alternate the lines so that some travel over the top of the letter A and some appear to be sitting behind the letter. Add in some additional gently curving lines which protrude from the stems, reaching a variety of lengths. And finally, add in a little circle at the end of one of these thin lines, with a scattering of dots at the top to give the impression of a poppy bud. Then it's time to add in some colour to the centre of the poppies and small yellow flowers. Make sure that the poppies are mostly dry, and then add in 3 or 4 small black dots in the centre of each one. The yellow flowers, meanwhile, will have an orange-yellow centre. Add orange to some yellow and put a few dots of this mixture in the centre of each of the 3 yellow flowers. And that is our first letter complete. Okay, moving on to the next letter, which in this case is a capital R, surrounded by grasses and wildflowers. Having drawn out the letter and filled it in with a block of burnt umber, just like the first letter A, let it dry and then mix white with some yellow until you have a very pale creamy yellow. Using a large brush, saturate it with paint, and with the tip of your brush, gently dot clusters of yellow speckles around the letter. The dots should look like water droplets when you apply them to the paper, and the clusters should vary in size, and the dots themselves should also vary in size. Some of the dots should sit directly on top of the letter R, creating an overlap. These are inspired by cow parsley, which is found in the British countryside and is rather lovely. These sprigs are also similar to gypsophalia, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, or baby's breath, which is often used in wedding bouquets. Both are fresh and whimsical. All the colours surrounding the letter R will be soft and gentle. As also shown in the addition of some chamomile flowers, of which we will have 3 surrounding the letter R. To create these, paint a small horizontal oval in a warm yellow, and then with a creamy colour slightly lighter than the colour mixed for the cow parsley, mix white with a very small amount of yellow. Surround the yellow oval with a ring of cream petals, leaving a small gap between the centre and the start of each petal. Now going back to the dots we put onto the paper for the cow parsley, it's important that the paint isn't completely dry for this step, but do wait for between 30 seconds and a minute before you go in. Using the paint you mixed for the dots, go back into the clusters and very gently dot your brush in the spaces between the droplets of paint on the paper so as to join some of them up together. You want the clusters to look organic, so apply the dots in a scattered approach. I would also recommend adding a few small additional standalone dots just outside some of the clusters to make them look light and airy. Once you've gone over all of your cow parsley clusters around the letter R, it's time to move on to the next part, where we're going to add in 5 pieces of wheat. Mix together some Vandyke Brown, which is a warm brown, with some cream, so that's a mixture of white with a small amount of yellow. This will produce a nice golden brown. Scattered around the R, lightly paint in lines of vertical dashes in sets of 2. Paint the first dash and then next to it, halfway up, paint in a dash of the same length. Then go back over to above the first and paint in another, and continue to a length of about 5 dashes, alternating sides as you go. You also want these heads of wheat to be slightly diagonal, varying in size and arranged so that they sit at different heights in and around the letter R to give more of a whimsical effect. The last part of this illustration is to paint in the stems of the cow parsley, chamomile and wheat. Using Sap Green and a small detail brush, we're going to go in and paint thin, green, gently curving lines that begin directly below the heads and the clusters of the cow parsley and chamomile. Under some of the clusters of cow parsley, turn the single line into the shape of a capital letter Y to give the impression that the stems are branching into smaller branches. I'd also recommend rotating the paper as you make your way around the capital letter R. Also, Just as in the case of the stems applied around the letter A, add in some additional gently curving lines which protrude from the stems, reaching a variety of lengths. And for the stems of the wheat, use the same warm cream brown mixture you made for the heads of the wheat. And that is the complete look for the letter R. Okay, so on to the final letter for today, T. Draw out your letter and fill it in with paint as you did for the letters A and R. However, this time, as an alternative, I've also cut away some small semicircles around the letter in order to make the overlapping of petals and buds a little bit more crisp. Now you can see I've already added in some flowers and buds. To create the buds, I made a dark pink, which was white mixed with a lot of red, and then painted circles of the dark pink around the top half of the T. I also added in a few buds where I made an upside down lowercase e shape, but with the part that's normally hollow filled in. To make the shapes of the flowers, mix a lighter pink, so that's white mixed with a little bit of red, and for some of the flowers, paint in 5 ovals in different sizes, with one end of each oval meeting in roughly the same place, and bring the other end of the ovals to a point. Then, for variety, paint in 1 or 2 flowers consisting of 5 petals of the same size, each equidistant apart. This is basically 5 ovals that create a classic flower shape, like you can see here, directly under the left-hand arm of the T. When you're painting the blossom flowers, make sure you saturate your brush with paint, and then once the shape is in place and filled in, rinse your brush, blot it to remove the excess water, and pull away some of the paint from the ends of some of the petals to give the impression of a highlight. In total, 5 buds and 6 flowers is a decent amount of blossom for surrounding the letter T. Next, we're going to add in some branches. So for this, use a warm brown. I'm using Vandyke Brown. There will be 3 branches protruding from the letter T. For the first, on the bottom left, paint in 1/2 of a hexagon and make the corners bulbous and rounded. All of these branches should look sort of knobbly. The second branch protrudes from the right-hand side of the letter T. Paint in a slightly wobbly line which extends out in a diagonal direction, which tapers from a thicker starting point and gets thinner as it extends up and out. Add some knobbly bits to the branch and paint in another line near the end of the branch, which turns it into a rough diagonal capital Y shape. Then paint a third tapering branch which sticks out of the top of the letter T and goes up and out towards the top right-hand corner of the paper. Go back to the bottom left branch, add in a small line that extends outwards to the top left corner of the paper, and finally add in an extra bumpy bit on the top branch. Now by this point the blossom flowers and buds should have dried, so we can add in another layer to the flowers. For this, mix up a bright pink by mixing white with red. It doesn't matter too much about getting a precise shade. The main thing to bear in mind is that it needs to be noticeably darker than the pink you mixed for the blossom flowers the first time round. Once the paint is mixed, saturate your brush, and in the centre of each of the flowers, gently use the tip of your brush to apply small clusters of dots that vary in size. And in addition to this, on the side of the buds, paint in an upside down curved teardrop shape along the edge of one side of each of the buds. This will give the buds a little bit more depth. Now, something I probably should have mentioned earlier in the video is I've included some instructions in the description box below for how to transfer the letters onto the paper of your choice using greaseproof paper. You'll need to select the font of your choice, print out the letter or letters you're going to use in a size you're happy with in black ink, and follow the instructions below. You know, greaseproof paper is actually very versatile. I personally also find it's very handy for using as a palette when painting with acrylic paints. If you're interested in having a go at painting with acrylics, I would highly recommend going over to the Liquid Art channel for some excellent tutorials. There's a link below. The tutorials are all very beginner friendly and there is a great range of paintings on there to choose from. Okay, once the brighter pink layer has been added to the blossom, we're going to add in some green stems to connect the different elements together. Put some sap green onto your palette tray and then look for areas where the blossom flowers and buds appear to currently be floating or suspended, and in these places paint in thin green lines from the bottom of each of the flowers or buds and either connect it to one of the brown branches or bring the green line round in a soft curve until it comes into contact with a flower or bud directly below it, to make it look like the stem started behind the flower. Once that's done, continuing with the sap green at the bottom of the buds, add in some small leaf shapes. When you do this, make sure the buds are dry and also add in some of those little leaves along the branches too. This will go towards really filling out the overall composition of the illustration and bringing a nice freshness to the design. You know, I love the way blossom is a cheerful signal that spring has arrived and winter's finally over. Next, we're going to give the blossom flowers some anther. I think that's how you pronounce it, which is the name of the little dots that contain the pollen in the middle of a flower. I have to confess that I had to look at the name of that specific part of the flower up, looking at flower anatomy. These are going to be created by speckling on little black dots in the centre of the blossom flowers, using a thin detail brush because you want the individual dots to be small and delicate. Now, I actually think that all three designs shown in this video, but especially this blossom design, would work well on a border on a page or perhaps a card. Simply adopt the process shown here and extend it along the length of however long your chosen border is for a nice added embellishment. Once the anther have been added to all the blossom flowers, it's time to just add in some finishing touches. Go back to the sap green and any areas that are looking a bit sparse, add in some more rounded leaves or fatten the leaves already in place, especially under the buds, as you'll see I'm doing here. And now we've come to the end of the third letter and third illustration. Hopefully, if you decide to give any of the designs covered today a go, you'll find it relaxing and enjoyable. The finished results should look a little bit like this. So thank you very much for joining me today, and until next time, stay safe, much love and happy painting.